Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. I'm Rebecca Lawrence and this is Voices. In this set of interviews, I will be focusing on issues of inclusion, diversity and allyship through intimate conversations with wine industry professionals from all over the globe. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com. Any amount helps us cover equipment, production and publication costs, and remember to subscribe and rate our show wherever you tune in. Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. This is the Voices series with me, Rebecca Lawrence. This week, I'm joined by Kimberly Sayid of L'Officina del Vino, New York. Welcome to the podcast, Kimberly.
Hello, Rebecca. Thank you.
So I like to start many of these conversations by asking my guest to introduce themselves to our listeners. So maybe you can tell us a little about who you are and what you're currently working on.
Sure. Again, my name is Kim Sayid, and although currently been traveling through Italy for a few months, I am from New York. I truly love Italian food, wine, and culture, and I've built my entire career working around these elements. I've been involved in Italian food sales for about 30 years and in Italian wine marketing for almost 6 years. During that time, I spent 2 decades with the Barilla Pasta Company, which is the world's largest pasta company. Then time with Principe Salumi, Galloni Prosciutto di Parma, Ponti Vinegar, and several other smaller Italian companies. And now, over the past year, I've recently become a licensed wine importer, and I'm awaiting my New York State wholesale license as well.
Wow, that's pretty exciting. I hadn't realized that.
Yeah.
So one of the things I love is that you've really taken your experience, this long background you have in the world of Italian food, and now you've combined it with Italian wine, just as is the case culturally in Italy. So I wanted to ask, at what point you knew that this was the kind of new direction that you wanted to move into?
Well, in many ways, food and wine in the US are seen as two separate things, and even distribution and management, for example, are handled very distinctively. While, just as you said, in Italy, they really go hand in hand. In Italy, you're not even served a drink or a cocktail without some food accompanying it. And I think to have a 360-degree handle on authentic Italian culinary tradition and modern lifestyle is very important to commingle both food and wine. In terms of my direction, I noticed that people in America are now actually just as open to discovering new flavors in wines as they are in food. And they're just as open to discovering new histories and stories in their glasses as they are in their plates. And therefore, for me, wine is definitely the new frontier in discovering Italy.
You have this long background, obviously, in working with brands and bringing them into the US market. I wondered if there are particular trends right now that you can point to that you're seeing growing. Obviously, like you say, people are beginning to explore a little bit more Italian wine and maybe unusual grapes. Is there something in particular that you're seeing in the US market?
In terms of wine, let's say, I think the beauty of wine is that everyone looks for and can find something different, right? Wine is so personal. And for me personally, I like high acid, I like freshness, vibrance. I want to taste the fruit, the soil, the air, the true essence of the origin of the wine in my wine. I look for simplicity and truth in it. And just like Italian cuisine generally differs from, let's say, French cuisine, for example, again, in its simplicity, freshness, few ingredients, little manipulation, I want the same approach in my glass rather than internationalization. Personally, I try to promote authenticity, typicity, and autochthony, which I think are some new frontiers. In terms of trends, yes, of course, there's kind of this dichotomy, right? Of course, there's always something boiling in the pot. And from one end, you have two older trends, let's say, that are still quite strong in the US. One is this oxidation, right? The so-called orange wines with skin maceration, use of amphorae as aging vessels. That is still going strong. And also the parkerization of wine is still going strong and hasn't slowed down. Producers aiming for a particular, say, international, very fruit or wood forward profile that scores high ratings and drives sales. Those two older ones are still continuing, But there certainly are new trends on the horizon that I find quite exciting. One, playing with and mixing new vessels with old vessels, cement tanks with or without the glass linings, eggs, larger ovals, a lot of blending and different passages among them. Of course, mixing stainless steel and wood thrown in there, but a lot of exploration and trial at the end of the day, with the goal of preserving inherent flavors. I find that really fascinating. And I've visited several producers these few months here in Italy doing that. And the second is autochthony. So discovering or rediscovering unique and indigenous, almost forgotten grapes. And Italy has so many of them. Kind of a returning to the roots, right? A nod to the underdog. And that one for me is actually the most captivating, I think, of all. This concept of autochthony.
I think that has also a huge amount of potential longevity for Italy because, as you say, there are so many autochthonous varieties here, each of them tied very specifically to a place and therefore tied to a story. So you can really take that into the market and you sell not only the wine, but its culture, its background, its story, and that just gives a little bit more to the wine in your glass to a consumer.
The whole experience. Yeah.
So we still are talking about COVID. We're still not quite through it. So, and I hate to bring it up and constantly in my interviews, but I'm interested to see or to hear from you if you think that this has changed the buying habits in the US. Have you seen, particular increases or drops off in interest? Has there maybe been? I wonder if there's been a return to people going for what they know, focusing on that kind of comfort of what they know, or if this has really been a time where there is this push to experiment with autochthonous varieties, maybe something that consumers haven't had before because they need a bit of adventure.
Well, COVID has absolutely affected buying habits. I think we started drinking like fish in America. Sales skyrocketed in all categories, whether it be wine, beer, spirits, both in stores and online. At this point, the stockpiling may have slowed down a bit, but the consumption is still going strong. And clearly, every facet grew, whether it be any price point or positioning, whether it be common, well-known brands and wines that people were familiar with, or even the new ones. Everything went and is still going strong. Yeah, absolutely affected it. And that could be positive and negative, right? Positive for sales, maybe negative in other ways, but definitely very strong.
Yeah, I feel like that's been mirrored in the UK market, which is my specialism, and very much we saw a huge increase. People can't go out to restaurants, they can't share wine with friends, so the home consumption went up, and this has really aided small independents, I think, in the UK, but has allowed a space for a mixture of both buying the same thing and having that comforting glass that you're going to like, you're going to recognize. But also I think there's been a capitalization on I'm sitting at home and I'm doing the same old thing every day, so maybe actually I'll choose this variety that I don't know. Or maybe someone's doing a Zoom tasting and they're talking about an area of Italy that I've never heard of. Maybe I'll go out and buy that wine. So I think you're right that there's been, and it's been, both positive and potentially negative at times, but it's nice to hear about people taking that leap to experiment.
Yeah, wonderful for small producers, for small importers, and for those indigenous or autochthonous grapes that don't usually have a lot of opportunity to shine.
So speaking of that kind of deep dive into autochthony, we actually met when you attended the VIA flagship course in Verona earlier this year. And this is a course that really, as well as talking about these hundreds of varieties of autochthonous grapes, also embeds Italian wine in this much broader context, talking about food, but also a lot of history and cultural background. And I wondered if, given your diverse background, if this was one of the things that drew you to the VIA course in particular.
Yeah, Rebecca, I chose VIA because obviously I have always enjoyed Italian wine, but I'm relatively new in the wine sales world. I was in search of a very credible program that was respected both in Italy and abroad. But I also wanted a program that would teach me more about Italian wine, down to the very gritty level that I really feel I need to achieve my goals. I've done the ICE program in the US. I did ISG levels 1, 2, and 3, WSET levels 1, 2, and 3. But I never felt fulfilled with the knowledge and depth of Italian wine education that I got from any of them. It was almost non-existent. Obviously, ICE focus on Italian wine, but very superficially in the US. And VIA is the only program that I've found in years that has ever that gave me that.
Yeah, it's one of the things that really drew me to the program as well, that there's so much more than just this, okay, you need to know these denominations and these grape varieties.
There's more than Pinot Grigio and Chianti out there for Italian wine study. Yeah. Really challenging, but really fulfilling.
I think it manages to hit the balance of that very well and just keeps your interest sparked, because there's always something that you can go back to and go, wow, I didn't realize that actually, Verdicchio came from this completely other region and it traveled around, and you've got all these sort of slight mutations and people traveling with grapes in different cultures.
I was blown away by the class. Yeah, I'm coming back.
Oh, I'm always tempted to just sit and enjoy it anew every time, because of course the other thing is having the insight of Scienza and all of this new genetic material that he's constantly doing the research on. That again was something that really drew me to the program, this idea that every year it's going to be slightly different because there's this huge source of up-to-date genetic material, and it's super geeky, but it's also amazing.
Oh, it was a full immersion in Italy. It was wonderful.
Now, speaking of Italian history, if I've done my research correctly, I understand you have a degree in Italian medieval literature.
Yes.
So I know it's a while back, but as an ex-lit student myself, although much more modern, I wonder what drew you to that genre. It really feels like there's been this beautiful thread of Italian history, culture through your life from very early on.
Yes. Well, my mom was born in Italy and her whole family, so that was a little bit of the thread. But that's an interesting question. And you're right, it was quite a while back. We don't need to address that topic. There were definitely things that sparked my interest in food in college, like Giovanni Boccaccio's Mountain of Parmigiano Reggiano, the Venus's tortellini shaped belly button, Dante's Sinful Gluttonies. I mean, lots of food, right, in Italian medieval literature. But in reality, my dream, I think, growing up was always to be a pediatrician. And then on my first trip to Italy, when I was about 16 years old, I think, I fell in love. I fell in love not only with the beautiful landscape, of course, and the delicious flavors, but again, to use the word geeky, more so with the unique regional relationships that food and ingredients had in Italy. And I know it sounds very weird, especially for a 16-year-old, but pasta, for example, I'll never forget being blown away by the learning and discovering in Italy that the fact that each area, region, even village has different pasta shapes. And these shapes are born from that village's particular geography, topography, history, much like wine, I guess, right? Being shaped from the particular soils and climates. Because, growing up in America, even as an Italian American, we see one pasta shape basically equivalent and interchangeable with another. If you go to the store to buy spaghetti and they don't have it, you buy penne, whatever. But instead, there's hundreds of thousands of years of history behind each and every shape, and they pair with very specific sauce. And they're actually not interchangeable at all. So as I said, they're not. You would change the entire menu before changing the shape, which simply wasn't what I was accustomed to. So as I said, coming to Italy, I was enamored. I threw away the entire idea of being a pediatrician, and I decided I wanted to live and work in Italy at any cost. And I made it my personal goal to visit each and every region and to discover the unique food and wine and tradition of each of those regions. And about sparking my interest in wine, my literary study actually is responsible for my wine passion. I never forget my first glass of wine, which I was studying in Italy one summer, and we had to read passages of Petrarca out loud while standing in front of the class in the middle of the rolling hills of Urbino in Le Marche. And of course, it was breathtaking and very stimulating. And one evening, we got a bottle of Verdicchio, one of those fish-shaped ones, right? And drank it on a hillside. And that was my first wine. And I think I was 18 at that time and never turned back.
Wow. I just have this beautiful image of you standing in those hills, just being washed over with this kind of love for Italy and completely changing everything.
Of course, in the 80s, I also had pretty big curly hair and, from Long Island, a lot of jewelry, but it was really wonderful. It changed my life.
So that experience actually of the Verdicchio ties beautifully into my next question, because I always like to ask my guests about their favorite Italian wine, maybe something either they're drinking a lot of currently, or maybe something they want to add to their portfolio, or a historically sort of favorite wine. So is there something particular that's sparking your Italian wine joy right now?
I love basically every Italian wine, so many, and of course, your taste change daily, depending on the weather, where you are, the mood, the meal, the people. But if I had to, so I could talk about any wine, but if I had to choose one, I would say, working for Barilla for so long, which is based in Parma, I came to Emilia-Romagna many, many times a year, and unfortunately never took enough advantage of Lambrusco at the time. And I took it for granted while being there. And today, being in the US, I find it quite challenging often to find excellent Lambruscos like the ones that I was always drinking in Parma or in Italy. Absolutely not the sparkly bubblegum Riuniti on ice, type of product that we remember from the 70s and 80s commercials. But Lambrusco, I think today is sexy, is sophisticated, diverse, can go anywhere from dry and savory to sweet, anywhere from light to dark, playful to serious. It's wonderful with food. It's affordable, it's hip, it's modern, it's young. Definitely something that is so versatile and one of my favorites. Even, to serve at home when we have guests, I never a doubt.
I love hearing people talk about Lambrusco because it was a real eye-opener for me coming to Italy and going to Bologna for the first time and being served Lambrusco, like I say, with food, and there are so many different types. And I'd always been like kind of snobby and super kind of dismissive of sparkling red wines. My only other real experience had been sparkling Shiraz for my WSET studies, which I'm not a huge fan of. I think probably, again, because of context. And seeing the wine in that context with the local foods that go with it, sitting and having it for an aperitivo, I really began to get the idea of Lambrusco. And it's been one of my kind of greatest discoveries of being in Italy is how much good Lambrusco is available readily and how many styles you can just try. And it's also for me now something I do that exact thing where if we have guests, particularly non-Italians who are coming to stay, I always make sure I've got a bottle of Lambrusco because it's such a surprising aperitivo for people.
And they're blown away.
Yeah, exactly. They love it, and it's so unexpected. And I love watching people's faces as they have some, maybe with some salumi, some mortadella, some cheeses, and they're just like, it really changes their idea of it.
Exactly. That's why I think all Italian wines are exciting and wonderful, but that is really phenomenal from that perspective.
So before we wrap up, I have to ask, what's next for you? Where are you headed on your Italian wine journey? You've kind of led a little bit with this, with your intro and what you're doing now. So I want to hear more.
Yes. Well, after these 3 months of traveling through Italy, we will finally be going back home mid-September. And as I mentioned before, I'm just waiting for my New York State wholesale license to arrive. And then the sky's the limit. I plan to launch an online sales portal dedicated exclusively to Italian wine, preferably autochthonous varietals only. And I'm really excited to finally be working closer with Italian wine and combine it with my love, certainly, for Italian food. I would continue to push not only myself, of course, to learn more and discover more, come back to Via, but also for l'Officina del Vino, which is my company, to help others to continue to appreciate and learn more about the incredibly vast bounty of grapes that Italy has to offer, as we said before. A lot of work ahead.
Well, hopefully by the time this comes out, our listeners will be flocking to your new venture to see what wines you have on offer. Kim Sayid, thank you so much for joining me on the Italian Wine Podcast today. Where can our listeners find you online or on social media to find out more?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity, Rebecca. And on social media, I can be found as Kim, K-I-M, Sayid, which is S-A-Y-I-D. On either Facebook or Instagram at the moment. And as soon as we are ready with L'Officina del Vino, more on that will be available too.
Everyone, we will tag Kim and her ventures in the notes for this episode, so please go and check her out. Thank you to everyone for listening. Don't forget to follow us on social media, subscribe, and of course, donate on the website to make sure we can keep these great conversations flowing. Kim, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Listen to the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Himalaya FM, and more. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com. Any amount helps cover equipment, production, and publication costs. Until next time, chin chin.
Hi guys, I'm Joy Livingston and I am the producer of the Italian Wine Podcast. Thank you for listening. We are the only wine podcast that has been doing a daily show since the pandemic began. This is a labor of love and we are committed to bringing you free content every day. Of course, this takes time and effort, not to mention the cost of equipment, production, and editing. We would be grateful for your donations, suggestions, requests, and ideas. For more information on how to get in touch, go to ItalianWinePodcast.com.